security update.
Tom Skerman.
Kia ora, Chair. Kia ora koutou, everybody. Thanks very much for your time this afternoon. I am going to provide an update on the Regional Water Security Program. It's the second time I've been in front of this committee. I will be taking the paper as read. I know there'll be questions here, and I want to make as much space as I can for those questions and queries. So I would just quickly like to, there's a bit of detail in the paper, but I really want to talk about the why, what and when of the Regional Water Security Program, to just give you that high-level view. And then I've got a longer presentation here, but rather than go through the entire presentation, just want to make sure there's an opportunity for some questions, and then I'll just, if there are some slides that address questions, I'll go to them then. But and quickly before I get into this, it was with great relief that and I think I better tell you now that I've already, actually my team is meeting with Te Kaha tomorrow over at the Napier Port to talk about his monitoring program, because we're really excited about that, and we think there's some real lessons that we can draw into specifically the work we're proposing to do for the Central Hawke's Bay Manitic for Recharge program, and what could be hopefully a really good cultural monitoring program there. So so just so you don't think that I only thought about that as an idea after seeing the presentation this morning, we're already first in the queue, so you all have to get behind us, I'm afraid. We're second in the queue, and so let's see if this works, shall we? I don't want to labour the point, and I don't want to go so high level that we're too high level. But I just think it's really important just to provide some context around what is the context of the Regional Water Security Program, and there's a paragraph in the head of the paper that talks about Regional Council's work in freshwater space is very detailed and very complex, and deals with issues that are, like today, and critically important today and next week and next month, to our plan change processes, which deal with water over sort of the timeframes of a decade, and how do we want to see water being managed. And I just want to say that the Regional Water Security Program is really focused on the very long term. And so I just want to just give a quick overview. This is a great graphic that I've used on some occasions. If all the world's water was pulled into a single bubble, it would be
Really?
That's how big it would be. And 97.5% of all water on the planet is salt water. So that means 2.5% is fresh water. And so of that 2.5%, so this is of the 2.5% of the total water, nearly 70% of that is in the form of ice and snow, and just a fraction over 30% is in groundwater. It's beneath our feet. So actually all the other water, and that's generally the water that we see, is only 0.035% of the 2.5%. So it's a tiny, tiny fraction. And so if we looked at that tiny, tiny little bubble down there, that's all the water that's in the soil, atmosphere, and biology, which is in us and the plants and animals, and the fresh water in lakes and rivers. So it's a tiny, tiny amount. And 87% of that water is in 3 lake systems, none of which are in New Zealand. And so the reason for pointing this out is just to remind us what a precious resource it is, and how finite it is, and how fragile our relationship with that water is. And the reason for raising that is that obviously there's that the world of water is changing, and it's changing through climate change, and it's kind of quite significant, the fact that we're having this discussion here today, the week that the latest Ipcc report has been released, which I think has unsettled a lot of us, reinforced some views. So this is just an extract from the report that was released on Monday. And it confirms, within the worst kept secret that we know is that, in New Zealand we're projected, on the east coast of the North Island to, have a lot less rain. Certainly in the spring and autumn, and some interesting stuff about summer rainfall and retreat. So we know that we're under a lot of pressure, and that means our fresh water resource is under pressure. And as I said before, we have a very fragile relationship with that. The water we see is just a tiny fraction, and the water we rely on. And in 2018, NIWA, has produced a report on hydrological projections, and Hawke's Bay rivers, in terms of New Zealand, are slated to be some of the most affected by climate change in this country. And so it, so in that respect, it's sometimes it's quite a challenge, the water security program, but it is a bit of a privilege to be part of a program of work that's dealing with this incredibly important issue. And so the objective of the water security program, and I'll get into, I'm still on the why, but so here's the objective: is that Hawke's Bay has long-term, climate resilient and secure supplies of fresh water for all. And it's the last two words that are the kickers, and that's what makes this program so hard. The for all, for some would be easy, but for all is going to be really hard, because it's talks about making sure that there's equity and access to water. And I think just a conversation we were having before, the for all is going to be absolutely defined by how this community determines the impact and the meaning of Te Manaroto Wai, because that is going to define what for all means.
Just a question, Tom. That statement, that what you've got on the screen now, that's a statement, not a question. We have got resilient, etc.
That's the
water supplies.
That's the program. That's the objective of the program.
Oh, that's the objective.
Yeah, that's the objective of the water security program. Okay. No, it's not. It's not a statement.
It's not a statement. Okay.
Thanks for clearing that up. And so I'm just going to quick.
Here, Mike. Here. Mike.
Oh,
he's all right.
Karen?
Didn't answer. Can you hear, Mike? Okay.
Back to you, Tom.
So I'll quickly talk about what's making up the regional water security program. The paper goes into great depth in terms of the the history and the funding and the work that we're doing with the Provincial Growth Fund to support this program. We'd be very grateful to receive that support. But at the front of the water security program sits a thing called the Regional Water Assessment. And the purpose of the regional water assessment is to directly acknowledge and address the fact that there's no way we're going to achieve long-term water security without addressing both demand and supply of water. And so, and it's been, the experience not only of this region but also, around the country, is it's very difficult to change the supply of water. And so therefore, we'd be remiss not to have a really hard look at how we're going to manage the demand for water, because we know that we've reached limits for water, and we know that climate change is probably actually going to deliver less water in the future. And so we need to make sure that we are looking at both sides of the water balance equation. And so the regional water assessment is a project that has three phases. The first phase is a data phase, where we are using a novel, I don't think it's been tried in New Zealand before, a system of environmental accounting to make an assessment of our sources and uses of water, and how much water is removed from the system and how much is returned to the system. And so we're just in the closing phases of completing that phase one with a draft report in front of us now. Phase two then says, okay, well, if we take those accounts, if we take that snapshot in time around, what is our water balance, then how is that projected to change over time and change over the very long term? What is likely to happen to the demand for water through, through growth in the communities, that we've been experiencing, and also what is going to happen to the supply. What is that supply picture going to be like? And it's on the budget that we're operating on, that we're not doing a very deep dive hydrological model. We're just sticking to the system of environmental accounting to understand how's that impact going to change. But I think we probably have a sense the fact that, with drier with a drier future, that the supply scenario is probably looking a little bit bleak. And given the fact that we're starting from a point where there's really no spare water to go around, and many would argue that we're potentially over allocated, then it becomes a little bit. In some respects, it may become a little bit irrelevant about what the extra demand might be, because if we can't supply it, we can't supply it. And again, we come back to Te Manaro Te Wai, which reinforces the need to take care of the environment and human health first. That means that the extractive use of water is going to be an allocation of water that's under extreme pressure going into the future. And so the third phase of the regional water assessment really comes down to decision makers, is telling the data story to decision makers and informing the community around what the future of fresh water looks like in the region, and then putting up for discussion and decision as around what is a long-term strategy. And what are the things that we can do to make sure that we meet that primary objective of secure supplies of fresh water for all. As I said before, that will be an important input into any decision, any sort of long-term strategic plan that the council and the community generates. But I did say that that because we got provincial growth fund funding through this process, we are able to, simultaneously doing with this work, we're able to explore the supply side solutions. And what we're trying to understand and what we're trying to deliver to decision makers is a clear understanding as what, if any, are the supply side options. And so this is the extent to which is storage on or off the table. And so the paper talks to some of the storage investigations we're having in terms of the Ngārororo catchment and the Tukituki catchment. But it's just important to note that no decisions have been made to progress or commit to any project. What we're doing is it's really expensive and hard work and complicated work to find out whether a water storage, at a scale that's significant to have an impact, at a community level, is viable and is possible. And so we're doing that work in parallel, and then that will help when we come to the decision time, just to know, are they on the table or are they not on the table? And if they are, when would you want to see them coming on stream if they're there? So that will be part of all that decision making that's ahead. And so that, the final comment is that all this work sort of comes together and helps council develop a very long-term, a very long-term strategy that can meet these incredibly big challenges that face the community in the years ahead, and not only in terms of the demand for water, but the impacts of climate change. And so, Chair, I know we've only got half an hour, and I've got slides here that can talk about the individual projects and things like that. But I know I just acknowledge Made, and we've made mention in the paper, and thanks Made for working with us on that around some of the investigations we had here. And I'm sorry, I see your guests have left, so they probably might have wanted to hear this. But I just think it would be really good to take any questions.
Okay.
Tom, if you take the water out of the river for those underground projects that they're mooting for the future, what effect does that have on the end of the result? If you don't take it, the water just runs into the sea. Why wouldn't you agree? Just take the water and put it back underground.
So, in terms of what we're proposing in Central Hawke's Bay, this is an oversimplification, right? But I mean, there's two ways to store water. You can store it in a bucket or in a sponge. And I suppose what we're talking about in CHP is using the ground as a sponge to hold that water. So you effectively fill the sponge up in winter, and then that water's there available through the summer to enrich there. So, I'm not 100% clear on your question in terms of why wouldn't we do that, because I suppose what we're doing is we're proposing to do that in the form of a short-term trial, so that we can understand, does it work? Is it a tool that is available to that community, further down the track? We believe, we've done a lot of work, done a lot of technical work, and we believe that there's a strong justification for having a lock, and the reason we want to have a look is we want to understand the result, and we want to understand the impacts of that, and the extent to which that's something that can actually benefit the environment.
If you fill the aquifer, does that improve the river?
So what we're proposing to do through that project is actually, because the aquifer is just not a single thing, right? So there's the shallow aquifer, and so part of the proposal is to pull water from the river, through a series of infiltration galleries to make sure that the water quality is fine, and then return some of that water to the shallow aquifer well away from the river. So that sort of boosts the water table. And so that should return more water to those nearby streams, and and improve their resilience over the summer. You should see more water flowing through those streams. But we're also looking at injecting water deeper into the aquifer as with the potential to maybe pull that water back out over the summer.
So, short answer to Paula's question, we think yes.
That's why we're conducting the trial.
We have to trial and prove it.
Yeah.
You just talked about two rivers there, the Tukituk and Ngaruroro, as rivers that are running dry. I could tell you now, the Porongaho River is running dry. And I actually thought it was through taking water out for growing crops, etc., but it's not. So the water's has obviously been taken somewhere else. And of course, there's not the same amount of water coming from the
Yeah, and predictability. So just as an example, where this is the proposed site for the aquifer recharge trial. Just so where we're at is that we've gone through a very long process of investigations and analysis to identify some sites. A lot of discussions with landowners to see that they're prepared to, because all this trial will happen on private land and things like that. But the next phase we're going into, and thanks to the Tamatea Tai Whenua, have been quite supportive in terms of us. We're going to conduct a series of meetings on the local marae in the area, with a view to developing a cultural impact assessment, and that's the team that we're taking to see the Napier Port tomorrow in terms of what the cultural monitoring framework looked like. And so we're in the consenting phase, and so that consent needs to meet all the requirements and environmental guidelines set down in plan change those. But what we'll see through there is that with a site in and around here, we'd expect to see on some of these streams, these lowland streams and creeks further down here, we'd expect to see better flows through the summer, more water in those water bodies.
Mr. Chairman, Tom, during summer, if you lock up the river mouths, what problems do you get from that?
I don't know, to be honest.
Then the water backs up for more people to use.
Yeah, I think, but potentially, but I think it would probably create some flooding issues and other
There's
issues.
too much water around.
Yeah, too much water around. So so we've had. That's not something we're looking at. I'd be intrigued to find out, but I wonder whether, because the thing is that the water then is right down at the bottom end of the catchment, and so you'd probably, I'm not sure how you'd access that water or move it around and things.
Will you ever get to a point where it's assessed, or there's a great flow at the minute, so you just detract some water to your aquifer?
Yeah, so what we need to do here is we need to apply for a consent ourselves to pull water from the river, and the idea is that you'd pull water from the river around just by the bridge on State Highway 50 there on the Waipawa, and then you pull it quite a way away, and you do that in the winter when you've got high flow, and a lot of that water is, at that time is recharging the aquifer anyway, because you've got quite a strong losing reach just down here on the bottom of the Waipawa. But we sort of get the opportunity to sort of collect the water through a gallery, so there's a degree of sort of infiltration. You clean that water, pull it across land in a pipe, and then run it through, a wetland system, a series of systems to make sure that the water quality is fine before we put it back down.
How damaged is the system now?
Well, we know it's pretty dry down there, and I think I'm not sure when we had someone present on this. Back last year, what they kind of talked about is in central Hawke's Bay around the Ruataniwha area, there used to be a system of races around there, that stock water races, and they were very inefficient, right? So they moved water all over the place, and a lot of that water actually was lost to ground, which actually, in its own way, created, better water tables, better water in the system across the landscape, and so that's. Those have all been shut down now, and we've probably seen a bit of a drying out of those areas since there. So they're definitely getting dry.
Do you have the ability to say, well, we overdid it here, we need to cut back, we need to cut back here, we need to cut back there? Do you have that ability to do that?
Yeah, we do have that ability to do that, and we do that through the process of plan changes. And so Plan Change 6 went some way towards that. It's raised minimum flows, it's raised cease take levels, so less water can be pulled out of that catchment, and the plan changes keep on rolling through. And so as we understand more, then the allocation is always up for debate. And then, which brings us back to Te Manaro Te Wai, which is the need to really establish what is the environment's need, because that's first and foremost.
The trial in Waipawa, is that first for this area?
So first for Hawke's Bay, there's been a trial in Gisborne, and there's trials in Canterbury, and it's used a lot around the world. I think there's about 1,000 schemes used around the world, but it's really important to emphasise the fact that it's a trial. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's really important to emphasise that it's a fact of trial. We need to understand what it is. So effectively, it's just it's mostly around the monitoring, understanding the impacts.
Why I'm asking these questions is that this came to Tamate, and I sort of felt that we should have discussed it at this level, so that we're all on the same page. Saves answering a lot of trying to answer questions. So I'm a lot more confident having heard you today than I was when this was put to me in committee the other day.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So look, we're looking forward to coming down and chatting to the, and meeting with the Maori and talking about it, and talking about that cultural monitoring program, what that could look like, because we get a chance to I don't think we can do a Napier Port type cultural monitoring program, but I mean we see that as probably been a key part of the consent conditions.
Fortunately for us, Porangaho's now got quite a substantial water caretaker, and she and that committee in contact with regional council on that, so brings a bit of confidence to perhaps what the future will look like.
Thank you for your report, Tom. Is there any further questions for Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Would someone like to move that we receive it, or you have a question?
Before I
You have some
move
questions?
the report, but Tom did mention that we'll be having discussions, particularly for Here Taunga.
Yes.
But given that the water strategy, regional water strategy is vast, and we're hoping to kind of get that conversation because we hold a consent that we transferred in a volume of water. You know, certainly Heretaunga Māori are not averse to water storage schemes, and of course in amongst that mix we've got a situation that occurred that we're going to discuss. So looking forward to that. So I move the report for the time being, just to note those things.
Thank you, Maori. Is it seconded? I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Very good report.
We now move on to the chair and the CEO's report.
Well, I've got to report on just two things I want to talk about today. Firstly is that we've now got the long-term plan has been done, and I'm concerned about the council's ability to undertake all the things that's expected of it. So the chief executive and I are meeting with the various chairs of all the committees and having discussions with them to get an overview from both the governance perspective and the key support staff person with them, what the pressures are, what the expectations are. And with that, we'll come back to a combined meeting of all of the council committees and council that have a discussion about how we undertake our work going forward. So we have to have a joined up view of this, and we have to be realise that some things we can do really well, gold plate, other things will have to be a silver, and some will have to be a bronze, because we're not going to be able to do everything to the highest standard. We'll have to make some choices. There's some very pressing issues for us about our long-term plans. Which brings me to what I think is the biggest point of all, and there should be almost no other things discussed, and it's the Ipcc report on the climate. Many of you have heard me give these little commentaries before, but I am particularly worried about the future, and we all should be. The point that Tom's made about about water it's been made before, but we need to appreciate together that the measurements of our water and rainfall and snow on New Zealand have shown that for the last 20 years, the amount of water falling on New Zealand hasn't declined, getting less. And there's no indication this is going to change anytime soon. It's going to get worse. So our rivers have got less water in them and less of all those things. Second thing is that the average temperature is going up. And we're seeing this reflected around the world. When I went to school, I was taught that Siberia was covered in tundra, frozen land, frozen all year round. What we have now, the tundra is on fire, no longer frozen all year round. And the Russians are flying planes over it, dropping water on it to put the flames out. Look at Turkey, Oregon, California, big fires in Australia. The planet's warming up. Bush is drying out, fires are occurring. This is going to get worse. There's no indication it's going to get any better. We also have the problem of sea rise. Sea level rise is increasing. The last few years, the underground of New York was flooded. It didn't flood when it was designed because the sea level was quite a lot lower. You had pictures on TV of people swimming to get out of the underground in New York. This is going to continue. No indication it's going to change. It's going to continue and it's going to accelerate. I remember in the 1970s seeing a report where people predicted that in 2040 that the world's climate would change dramatically and irreversibly. There'd be no going back, cataclysmically. That report was pulled out and redone by a group of scientists who reported in The Guardian that all the figures they used in the 1970s were proven to be correct. So, according to them, we've got 20 years. Now, we need water for three reasons. First and most important reason is the environment. We can't sustain the environment, we can't sustain anything. Second thing we need water is for humans. We need to drink water. We need it. Third thing we need it for, the third demand of it, is for industry and agriculture. Environment's first, humans second, industry and agriculture third. We need to make some significant changes quickly to put ourselves in a good position. Secondly, we need to change what we do. I just think it's absolutely insane that Bezos and others are flying themselves into space and hope to make space a commercial proposition, burning up more stuff, putting more stuff in the atmosphere as if there's nothing going wrong here. Well, things are going wrong and going wrong badly. We cannot continue to live the way we have lived. We all need to make changes. Things need to happen fast. And what's happened to the world is what's happened to our rivers. It's called the tragedy of the commons. That because it's common, no one takes care of it. You know, and because it's common, no one's responsible. So if a farmer puts on a lot more fertiliser than is needed, it doesn't matter because it goes into the river, it's not his. No one owns it to tell him that it's wrong. And then the farmer said, well, I only put a bit in. Other people put a lot more in. You know, if I change my way, it's not going to make any difference. But of course it is. What we have here is a tragedy of the commons. We live in a common biosphere, and we all have responsibility for it. Yes, we can point to coal-fired power stations in China and all the rest of it, but we need to do our bit. We need to change what we do, or else we have no authority to growl at anybody else. This is not about us, this is about future generations. And I think we need to see this is the key part of our work. The tools we have for our planned changes are too slow and too inept to manage the water situation that we need to make changes for. We've got tank stuck in the court. We're arguing over that. By the time it comes out, another 10 years before we make any changes. That's half of our 20 years gone, and we're stuck on the same thing. This is really serious. The other thing we haven't got in our head is this other point I'd make before I stop, because I can go on with this for a long time, is several countries were identified as being best placed to enhance your chances of surviving the changes that are coming. Iceland, Great Britain, New Zealand. Now, people are already making plans to come here and set themselves up to wealthy. They're going to escape. What they're heading to is what I would describe as a lifeboat in the South Pacific. That's Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now, we've got many of our kids, grandkids, etc., who live overseas. They're in these places which are under threat. If Melbourne gets to over 40 degrees, the predictions are that shortly Melbourne will get to 50 degrees in the summer. Well, 50 degrees is unlivable. They live in 50 degrees plus at Cuba Petty because they live underground. We're not going to dig underground to put 5 million people in a hurry, if ever. Then we've got people who live in Europe. And I think these people are going to look and decide to come home. Now, if we have just 1/10 of those people who are New Zealand citizens, entitled New Zealand citizens, come home, we're going to struggle. Houses, jobs, etc. We have a massive problem coming. But the most fundamental of it all is our water and water security. This is one thing I think this council has to look at really seriously, and we all have to get a view about what this means and what we're going to do. We cannot continue on the same track as we have today, because if we do, we're just failing in future generations. So we need to make some changes. The other part about this is this council is going to certainly be given responsibility for the coastal hazards, Tangoia, and instead of having been with Napier and Hastings and the regional council is going to be responsible for it. We're responsible for the strategy about adaptation. It's going to be big work, but let's know this: we're never going to build a wall big enough, ever, to stop the sea where it is. We're going to retreat, and we're going to retreat, and it's going to take everybody with it. It's not going to be Desoa's Pākehā or Māori or whatever. It's not going to be as a home or marae. It's just going to take what the sea will take. So we're all going to face this. So there's big questions for us to ask, and the change for preparing ourselves, in my view, starts almost immediately. It's got to be one of the biggest focuses this council has, because no one else in this region, no other entity in this region is capable of leading it as well as we are.
Chair. Perfect segue. So, in response to the challenge that Rick's thrown down, I have covered this previously, so it's really just a bit of a reiteration of what we've got going on across the organisation at the moment, which is essentially the commencement of the Kia Rite Time to Act long-term plan, which commenced on the 1st of July this year. As we've reflected on the organisation and its role and the challenges we face and what it is this organisation's set up to do, it's apparent that climate change is at the heart of everything we do, has largely always been so, going back to catchment board days when we were established to put up flood schemes and stop soil erosion in the hills from storm events. So, building off the funding we got from the Crown during the COVID recovery infrastructure funding round and our own funding put forward in this long-term plan, we've got the flood scheme upgrades well underway now in Hiritonga and in the Upper Tukituki. In Hiritonga, we're finding some weaknesses in the flood network, particularly around the adequacy of some of our stop banks. We know in the lower Tukituki we haven't got the level of protection we need. So there are around 40 projects across those two schemes that are now underway in different stages of planning and delivery, but we'll be upgrading both flood schemes to ensure that we can withstand a 1 in 500 year flood event. That's a pretty high level of protection, but I don't think we should ever kid ourselves that that's a guarantee that we won't have a storm event at some stage that might exceed that. And indeed, in the longer term with climate change, we'll have to come back and revisit those levels of protection in all probability. The recent events in Westport with the Buller River, I think are a stark reminder of how quickly a weather event can come. Of course, we had our own experience here in Ahuriri in November last year, which incidentally caused $84 million worth of damage to homes, vehicles, property, businesses here. So,
Just to say one thing about the Buller River, I just think it's an unbelievable fact. The Buller River rose 12.5 metres above its norm. 12.5, and it's a big river. I mean, this is just astounding. So, where could we cope with 12.5 metres increase in height on our rivers?
we get an event like that, we're going to be in some trouble in all likelihood. So this work is urgent, and we're very fortunate that councillors have approved the funding alongside the Crown funding to get this underway. There still remains huge vulnerability in our cities with the stormwater networks, particularly here in Ahuriri. Ahuriri has a fundamental problem with being so low to sea level that the rate at which you can pump water out of this city and get it off the coast is incredibly limited. And if you get a storm surge event and a king tide all at the same time as a heavy rainfall event, you've got a serious problem. So Napier City Council's got a long way to go to protect its community, and I think increasingly we've got to have some tough conversations about the expansion of housing in Ahuriri, because it's all in flood zones, it's all within sea level rise, and it's all within tsunami evacuation areas as well. So at the moment, Napier City Council is contemplating a spatial strategy that has further expansion of housing around its perimeter in some of these vulnerable areas, and further intensification of housing within the city itself. So all that lies ahead. So climate change is all about having either too much water when you don't want it or not enough. And of course, Tom's just covered the water security program, so the options are well underway on that. Rick's covered the leadership that council's agreed to take on coastal hazards. We've now got the hard yards ahead in terms of consultation on funding those interventions at the coast. And some tough conversations with the community too about changing the natural character of our coastline to be more of a hard engineered environment, potentially with more groins and seawalls than we've been used to having. The long-term plan has funded a new role in our Civil Defence Group for Lifelines infrastructure and recovery from events, which is timely. And we're also reviewing our response capability at the moment to ensure that when we get the next event, we're in the best possible shape across the councils of the region to respond. Rick mentioned fires, and I should just say the coordinating executive group on civil defence is working with Fire and Emergency New Zealand around fire risk in the region, and there is technical work going on to understand what that looks like, where our communities are most vulnerable from fire. And we should expect that the sorts of fires that we've had in recent times in the Tukituki Valley and Tangoio will become more frequent and will become a problem. The erosion control scheme was, in the last long term, $30 million gross, including 25% contribution from landowners. In this long-term plan, it's been extended to become $30 million net council contribution alongside the contribution from landowners. And we've changed the funding criteria from 75% subsidy back to 50% subsidy to make the money go further, because that's now oversubscribed. So essentially that's an expansion of our erosion control funding. And importantly, that's not only about putting trees in the landscape to keep soil on farms, it's to keep soil out of our waterways, which reduces their flood resilience, is also causing environmental problems. The long-term plan also had the Right Tree, Right Place pilot, so that work is underway, and we're currently working with a major environmental non-governmental organisation from the United States around a large increase in investment there to trial trees on farm at a bigger scale, potentially up to 50 or 60 farms across the region. Our planning is commencing now on the on-demand public transport trial, and ultimately we've got to get people out of using their individual cars in the region and get public transport up. And there's increased funding in the long-term plan for sustainable homes, which is running at a really, really high level. More and more people putting solar, hot water heating, solar on their for their electricity, putting double glazing and insulating their homes, doing all those sort of things around energy efficiency, so that's great. There's a climate change ambassador role in the long-term plan, so we're just refining the job description for that at the moment, and we'll be out recruiting, and their role will be to work with our community around climate change. Yesterday, Rick and I had a discussion with Ngahiwi Tōmoana about the possibility of a community engagement event around climate change and a partnership between the iwi and council over that. So that's some work to do, and we'll come back and give you some more information as that develops. But look, while we've got this big focus on climate change, the freshwater reforms that were initiated way back in 2011 continues. The Kotahi plan change piece is major. There are new regulations rolling out on things like intensive winter grazing. We've got about 700 farms that do fodder cropping in winter, so there's new regulations around that practice, new regulations around stock exclusion of fencing and cultivation of slopes. So compliance and enforcement effort there. Huge effort for science and for Maori partnerships as well. So Piri's team in this long-term plan expands with a northern and southern relationship manager for Māori partnerships, and also a mātauranga specialist role that we'll be recruiting for shortly. Te Manawa Te Wai, we're working both at the national level, and there was a good workshop that was attended by a very large number of council staff just 2 weeks ago on Te Manawa Te Wai. And obviously the local engagement is the critical piece on that, and that's going to ramp up shortly with mana whenua across the region on that. Tank, so we've The commissioners have heard largely, nearly all of the submissions. They're coming back shortly to have another day or so of hearings, and then hopefully we'll get decisions before the end of this calendar year. Outstanding water bodies, so that's, I think, been covered, as I understand, by Mate earlier on, so that's now gone to appeal. And the water conservation order on the Ngāreroro catchment, we are currently awaiting the court's decision on the appeal on that. So the freshwater planning and legal work just continues. Our more practical work around biodiversity, so we're really excited that there was $10 million provided in the long-term plan for an Ahuriri Regional Park, which Councillor Ormsby has spearheaded. The planning for that is now to commence, and that's matched by $11 million from Napier City Council to create a really significant capital investment to transform Lagoon Farm and add to the estuarine environment. So that's a huge piece of mahi that lies ahead. 4.2 million, I've touched on this before, that came through Jobs for Nature for erosion and riparian fencing. That's well underway. A huge amount of that fencing's already occurred, and the fencing contractors we work with have been able to take on additional staff, and there are social procurement outcomes, including employment for Māori, that are embedded in that, and hopefully we'll get some reporting back to you on that soon. We also were successful in $2 million for fencing off 460 odd hectares of land, Kiwi2 native bush across the region, so that's great. And there is funding the long-term plan for the planning on a Wairoa Regional Park, and so we'll hopefully get that underway with the Matangiro Reserves Board and Wairoa District Council soon. Reviewing the biosecurity programs at the moment, and the top priority there is possum control. The possum control program has some weaknesses, and we're seeing possum numbers climb back up in some parts of the region, so that's kind of urgent. So the council's busy right across the board at the moment, but at the national level there's also a huge amount of moving parts. So on top of the freshwater reform, which I've often said is the biggest reform in the history of the resource management, we're now having the Resource Management Act itself being replaced by a Natural and Built Environment Act, Strategic Planning Act and Climate Change Adaptation Act. So that's a significant amount of legislative and policy work to go. So the Select Committee has begun an inquiry already on the exposure draft of the Natural and Built Environments Act. I was late to this meeting today because I was on a national meeting with public sector chief executives on the Strategic Planning Act, and a particular topic of discussion in that was the role for Māori in strategic planning going forward. And it gave me an opportunity to talk about what I think is a fairly comprehensive set of arrangements we have in Te Matua Maui, which is our regional planning committee as a 50-50 co-governance committee for regional planning, supported by this committee, the Māori committee, and now the introduction of Māori seats to our council. So it sort of rounds out the various different ways in which tangata whenua in the region are represented. There's lots to do on climate change, and there'll be continued reform, both in policy and in the economy on that. Three Waters reform, which I know this committee's familiar with, is now getting to an intensive phase where the government's put forward its proposals for aggregating the Three Waters to 4 entities nationally, which would put all of Hawke's Bay's Three Waters assets into an entity that runs from the top of Tairāwhiti all the way to the top of the south as well, and everything in between on the east coast, including Wellington. So the government's provided 8 weeks for comment on that. There's a session on that on Monday for councillors across the rohi, and participation to represent everyone at this table is being provided by Mike and Michelle next Monday on that. And look, if that wasn't enough, the government has initiated a Future of Local Government inquiry, which is looking at the future role for all councils, but there are particular decisions that lie ahead for the regional council. And included in the scope of that is looking at the role of Māori in decision making. So huge opportunity, I think, for constitutional reform and evolution. Huge opportunities for our council and our region to show some leadership across these issues because of the relationships we already have and the ways we work, and the opportunity to further enhance all of that. But lots happening, and I think perhaps just the final thing I'd say, which rounds back to where the chairman was coming from, there's an urgency that lies ahead for us as a region, for the nation and for the planet. And what worries me the most is our ability to make decisions at pace. And I recognise that there are fundamental trust and confidence issues in the Regional Council because of the way in which historically we've gone about the way we've worked, particularly for tangata whenua. And I understand that there's an awful lot of things that need to be fixed and addressed. It will be the pursuit of the perfect that will get in the way of us making pragmatic decisions. And just as I said it in relation to our coastal environment, us having to put modified structures in place, it's going to be the same with flood protection, the same with water security. We unfortunately, in the same way we've had to put stop banks up and straighten rivers and take gravel from rivers, we're going to continue to have to be pragmatic and modify our environment to manage the risks that we face around climate change. So that's not easy. That all involves difficult trade-offs, but we're going to need to make some of those trade-offs at pace. So, Chair, I'm sure the Chairman and myself are happy to take any questions. Otherwise,
Any questions?
Probably not so much insofar as questions, well, perhaps yeah, but hey, thank you both, Rick and of course James. And you do go right into under the skin in terms of what realities we face. And you posed, of course, the timeframes by which, decisions, and I understand all of that. And I guess it's probably through those pragmatic decisions, and you rightfully said, James, I just acknowledge what you had said about, tangata whenua, how things in the past is in the way, and I guess it is really for us to ensure that we are taking a very pragmatic, approach in a tikanga sense too as well. And of course it's all about precautionary, and in the long-term sustainability, our value sets when it does come to things that we have prize our value and our connectedness with, and we see significant change, and there's no two ways about it. At the end of the day, we've got to do a bit of tightening up, and also about how carbon footprint, everything that's rolling at us, climate, sea rise, reforms, future government, RMA, a lot going on in this space. And as Rick said, by the time we come out of some of these appeals and environment courts, it's a lot of resource and a lot of time that gets sucked up into a dark hole in space, and certainly from where we come from, it's trying to not get into that, but you almost get to fall into it because it's due process. We're following the law by saying if we've got an issue, you've got to come through it this way. And I only wish that, boy, if there was any way by which we could expedite, and as you say, through trust and confidence, because really it is about relationships. We have a relationship back because we advocate on behalf of our marae, our hapu, our people, our communities. And then we sit here and have to really press upon the relationship that we have with local authorities. And I think it's really key in actually having to say this message. It's more about the relationship in order to expedite the speed of trust in order to get us to where we really need to get to. We're all in this new space with everything landing on us, and it's just so hard from where we try to move in and amongst, I guess, having to first of all soak up all of this stuff in a sensible, in a manner, because it's just coming at you. It takes a real big effort and certainly knowledge from where I work from to create that ability and capacity in order to kind of provide the solutions that we're looking at and saying, okay, you're running down here, we're running down here, somewhere in between is a collision, a good collision, both in terms of mātauranga Māori and of course in terms of Western science contribution, which I said a little earlier on today. I only wish we could accelerate that to kind of meet up more quicker. Anyway, but just to acknowledge what you've just put up there, both of you.
Ngā mihi Māori.
Very helpful.
Any other further commentary or questions?
I just pick up on what Mare said. We've got to find better ways of doing things. And I just feel on occasions we are having discussions based on yesterday's views and yesterday's disputes. We've kind of got to get ourselves somewhere into a place where we have a discussion based on today and tomorrow's things. We haven't quite got there yet. So your thoughts and advice on how we might shift ourselves a bit further down that would be really appreciated. We've got to make decisions in the best interest of all of us here, quicker and easier. So it's in our interests to do that. Any ideas you have, I'd welcome.
Sometimes it's just having the type of discussion that we're having right now. It's about working towards a better position of trust and confidence with one another.
Well, there are many of them. We just need to say, let's have a conversation, a cup of tea, and start unpacking one at a time. But I agree totally. It's about, I'm thinking, I've got, like you all, we've got children, grandchildren, mokopuna, and that's been probably the thematic thread that's telling me what is it we're making now today to give them a sense of protection and safety going forward in the future with what we're working with, and let's create some tools to enable that.
Yeah, 100%. Yep.
Okay, would someone like to move that we receive the council report?
James will move it, I'll second it.
All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried, thank you. We now move on to item 13, Outstanding Water Bodies Plan. It's on page 41 of our report. And welcome to Belinda and Nicola. Kia ora kōrua.
Oh, that's not the one.
It's James.
Sorry.
Just as we're looking for the presentation, I do note to Wairau, still on the Uncle Bill, I can see you. As part of your Tai Whenua report, you did reference to Wairau River. And you were considering an appeal process. If inside the paper you will see that the appeal date or the date for receipt of appeals has actually passed. So this is an information-only paper, and the debate process to be ensued is actually through that appeal process.
Kia ora koutou. For those who don't know me, I'm Belinda Harper and this is Nicola Nicholson, and we've been running the Outstanding Water Bodies Plan Change. So in end of June, the independent hearing panel released decisions on that plan change. So we've just come along today to talk to you about those key decisions. Before I dive into that though, I thought I'd just run over some of the key concepts around outstanding water bodies, and then lastly, what the next steps are. So, firstly, what is an outstanding water body and what does outstanding mean? Well, being outstanding is a high test, and essentially an outstanding water body is one which has exceptional values and best of the best or stands out in the region. So for example, that could mean a water body that has the highest diversity of wildlife or native fish or special rafting feature or a big unmodified wetland or a unique landscape. So why identify them? Well, the reason we went about this process is because it is set out in the NPS-FM, and it's also required by policy in our RRMP, which is our Resource Management Plan. And the other reason is because it's easier to protect now than fix later. So if there's outstanding water bodies or outstanding values out there, you can wrap round an appropriate policy framework and then protect those going forward. It's also important to note that the NPS-FM, it does, oh sorry, that sort of jump slides, it does have specific requirements for other water bodies, and wetlands and degraded water bodies. So it's not all about just outstanding water bodies. And one management approach does not fit all. So the Outstanding Water Bodies Plan Change is just one of the many, many management approaches. It's one small piece of the puzzle. So the NPS-FM and our work program recognise this and provide for all water bodies. Just going back to where I was, so are water bodies which did not gain an outstanding status still important? Well, yes, they most definitely are. Just because a water body isn't outstanding in the Outstanding Water Body Plan Change doesn't mean it's not important or has no value. And it also doesn't lessen the importance of other water bodies. And it also doesn't change how other water bodies are managed in the region. So moving forward to June, a hearing was held in December last year, and there were around 41 submissions on the Outstanding Water Bodies Plan Change, and some submitters turned up. The hearing was held, and the independent hearing panel came and listened to those submissions and made a decision. So I'll just run through the key aspects of those decisions. Essentially, it's resulted in a policy framework which directs future plan making to protect the outstanding significant values of water bodies. And it also confirms that the test for outstanding sets a really high bar. And so that's just what I ran over earlier, is to be outstanding, a value must stand out or be superior to others. It also confirms that outstanding values do include cultural, spiritual, recreation, landscape, geology, natural character, or ecology values. And it also confirms that they do not include consumptive or economic use values such as irrigation. There was an adoption of an outstanding water body identification screening criteria to help identify outstanding water bodies in the region. And the policy framework that was decided on was to provide for existing activities to continue, but only in a way that protects the outstanding water body. There were two separate tests that came out through that framework, through the policy framework, which the panel decided on. One was to do with existing activities. They can continue in a manner providing they're protecting the outstanding water body. Any new activities coming in and near that outstanding water body, they would need to look at preventing any adverse effects that were more than minor. This was also one of the other key decisions, is the outstanding water bodies in Hawke's Bay. So there were 15 outstanding water bodies identified in Hawke's Bay by the panel. I won't run through them all because they're in your agenda item, but I can come back to specific questions later. Here are their locations. I mean, it's a big, small map, so it's pretty hard to see. And then lastly, next steps. So appeals did close on Friday. 3 appeals were received. And that process now opens up to Section 274 parties, which are essentially other submitters who do want to join and have interest in the issues that were appealed on. The next stage of the process is that these appeals will proceed through the Environment Court, and that could include mediation and court hearings. And that is essentially it. So if there's any questions about process, plan change, let me know.
Well, thank you, dear. How many in the submissions? Was there a total of around 35 systems that were put up? I'm just trying to...
Oh, water bodies or submissions?
water bodies.
Oh, water bodies. Originally, there was 38 in the proposed plan.
Right, okay. And I guess part of this, the benchmarking in terms of identifying, these high-level attributes, it did set a bar, and I understand through the process there was a very independent body that came in to set some of those parameters. I'm trying to think of the process stream. It might have been a kind of like a streamlining process within setting what those key attributes to set the bar were being done. What I'm trying to get to here, of course, is if there were going to be any of these standards or tests, it was done quite independently outside of this region by another body and group of people.
Sorry, no, I don't. I'm not sure of what the question you're asking, but so essentially a hearing was held in December, and they were from different parties within the region, and they came to the hearing, and they all presented evidence at the hearing, and then the hearing panel, who were made up of
I got
three
the report
independent
about 3
commissioners.
Fridays back, and it makes particular reference. Sorry, I was just trying to find the term for it. But I know it wasn't imposed by the commissioners, it was imposed by a very independent panel. And the reason why I'm saying that, anyway, I'll get to where I'm going on this is one of the awkward things when you get to set, I guess, the test and the bar of what's going to be in and what's going to be out, because 38 minus 15 means quite a few missed out. And that there was a test within that to also, and correct me if I'm wrong, to have not only the marae or the hapu that we're putting forward in these respective submissions, this particular water body to be considered as an outstanding water body, needed the support of other marae and hapu or hapu groups within the decisioning. So it didn't necessarily also come from the group that was making the application, such as the true mana whenua, but part of the test was also dependent on, correct me if I'm wrong, on other marae and hapu neighbours having to support the views of that particular mana whenua group in putting forward their outstanding water body area.
So my understanding of the decision is that a number of different options got put up to the hearing panel to decide how to select the outstanding water bodies within the region, and they've traversed that in their decisions report. So it's probably best to go back to that, and that they did decide to adopt a modified version of a screening criteria to include within the plan change.
I guess my point here is that we had no input on how you would set that test. This is just part of that disconnect, I guess, in terms of how these particular processes are governed. I'm sure there's going to be others that were quite totally dissatisfied with the decisions. What's 38 minus 15, maybe 17? Well, what's my maths? 30 plus 8, 41. So, I know there were some real difficult issues which we've highlighted in our submission, just picking up on exactly where we think there was some, no fit, particularly coming from having to set those sorts of things from within mana whenua, tangata whenua consultation to provide that test.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, what gives you the right to come and set that water body from the bridge down to the mouth on that Porangahau River?
So I'm just going to jump in and ask if those questions in that tone, in terms of what gives you the right, can be directed back through the chair, please.
No, you can't. No, you can't. It's not at liberty to talk about that side of things.
So I must.
I'm not getting raru here. I'm just a group of people. I'm an old man that comes from Porangahau. A group of people have come down there and set a precedence on a piece of river that means so much to me. What I hear here is that you're about to set some rules and regulations on that section of river. And you've given me no input.
Alder, perhaps I can help here. So the outstanding water body plan change was something that is required by law. It's required by national direction for the regional council to develop a plan change to identify and protect the significant values of outstanding water bodies in the region. That piece of work was particularly required by a court decision, the timing and the urgency of that work by a court decision of which Ngāti Kahungunu Iwi Incorporated were instrumental. So that set the priority for doing this piece of work. It was undertaken underneath the auspices of the Regional Planning Committee. So the Regional Planning Committee had oversight of the development of the plan change. And when it came to the RPC, the tangata whenua reps asked for considerable further work to be done, including the funding of local, I think it was Hapu, to do further work on understanding within their rohi what might constitute an outstanding water body. It was that process that actually took it from 15 up to 38. The council staff were facilitators of the process, and it was quite participatory. It's true to say that the offer of funding that participation wasn't taken up that broadly. And I recognise to Mare's point earlier on, everybody's busy and there's an awful lot on. So in many cases, there wasn't the capacity probably at Hapu level to participate in this. But there was a long period of time, some years of development of this plan change and extensive consultation undertaken. It was then referred as a proposed plan change to independent commissioners to consider, and it's those commissioners that have made the determination in relation to what water bodies constitute outstanding, and that's what's now been appealed to the Environment Court, of which Ngāti Kahungunu Iwi Incorporated and the Hiritonga Taiwhenua are parties to that appeal. So I feel comfortable that this is a plan change that the RPC, as our co-governed treaty partnership entity for regional planning, has had very strong involvement in and oversight of, and that there was a lot of consultation in its development. But I recognise the fact there will be communities across the region who will be surprised because they won't feel like they were adequately involved. But to Belinda's point, this is one very small instrument in the much bigger piece of reform of all of the rules. And all of the rules will actually come through the Kotahi plan change, which we will do very much in partnership and on the ground with the community. So there's nothing in my mind that anyone needs to be fearful of here. It's really just whether or not the net has been cast wide enough for those water bodies to be included. So hopefully that gives you some comfort.
It's the next thing that's in my head is what happens to the partnership we have here?
Well, as I say, so we have RMA planning decisions, of which this is one, legally sit under the Regional Planning Committee. That's a 50-50 co-governed joint committee. It was that committee that decided the content of this plan and decided to notify this plan. So in my mind,
point, James, we're going to get a chance to, enlarge on this, or to have some input into it, or put our view forward, or.
Sure.
well, the plan's now going to go before the Environment Court, and it has been decided by the independent commissioners. So I think this throws up a bigger question about the relationship of this committee to the RPC when it comes to regional planning matters. And that's a bit of an unresolved issue, and we historically have tried to have some discussion between the two committees about their roles.
The Hawke I've already read between the lines, and I actually rang. I think I spoke to you. You put me onto someone else. And I never heard from no one, but I've really got a picture of it now.
I'll just pick up on James's point. Paul, you put your finger on a problem, which we haven't resolved yet. We started off with having a Maori committee, and then on top of that, with treaty negotiations, we've got a regional planning committee, and we're now about to go and put in 2 constituencies for Maori to be rigged. Well, this is all good. More is better than less. But I don't think we've quite figured out how this thing works properly yet. Not everybody's got quite oversight on it. And so we have on the past quite often consulted with the Maori committee about things, and the council and the RPC said, well, that's all right, you consult with them. And sure, you told us that the law says that we're only involved in RMA planning, but we would like to know, and we'd like to be involved. So we advise them as well. We're really trying to get this thing to run better. We're making mistakes, but I just want to reassure you, they're honest mistakes, not deliberate mistakes, and people aren't getting the information quite at the same time and miss the importance of it. But we've got to do better, I accept that. But we also got to think about how we might do this better collectively, and maybe a new processes might be what comes out of it at the end of it too. So, I don't know.
Has to.
Yeah, well, maybe, yeah, that's right. I think so. This has grown up like Topsy. Let's be fair.
Belinda, do you know whether there was particular input from Ngāti Kuri, for example?
I would have to go back through. I know that we sent it out, so I have got some slides here which talks about the process. I mean, I'll run through these quickly. So it was quite an in-depth process that we did begin back in 2016, and we did review over 90 documents and created a summary report that outlines 130 water bodies in the regions, and it's got all the values at a high-level summary put into that document. That document was then sent out to all the treaty settlement entities and all the iwi authorities, trying to get input back into it to see whether the content was accurate or needed any amendments or anything added to. As James pointed out, the RPC was heavily involved in this. It was sort of a joint process in terms of how we were going to identify outstanding water bodies. There was always a big tension because of the Māori worldview. It doesn't align with all water bodies really are outstanding, but a decision was made that we would progress it in this manner. And then when it went to the Regional Planning Committee, 22 water bodies were selected sort of as potential outstanding water bodies. We went back out to the iwi authorities to see if there was any further information. Another 20 were added, and then we got an expert panel in to have a look at all the values and determine if any should be outstanding water bodies, and the end result of that was that they were all put into the plan change as outstanding water bodies.
I think, look, there was a very pragmatic conversation at the RPC about the fact that from a Te Ao Māori point of view, the idea that some water bodies are more outstanding than others is highly problematic. They're all taonga. So that was accepted, but we all agreed that we were required by law to identify these. We had an Environment Court decision back from an earlier Plan Change 5 that said we needed to notify this plan change before we could get on and do tank or any of the other plan changes in the region. So the tangata whenua reps from the Regional Planning Committee said, well, for good or ill, we're stuck with this, so we'll proceed. We'll still have the plan change, but recognising that it does not sit comfortably with tangata whenua, and we understand that. But it's not the last word in freshwater management. There's an awful lot of other things that we can and do around the outside of this.
Yeah, sure, and I think just trying to look through you, Mr. Chairman, just look at what those steps can initially mean and do. I mean, I look at local expert panel and I'm going, geez, we're part of this. So the co-creation, co-design right at the very front end, including us, would kind of just get a high level of comfort knowing that we're contributing and actively participating, not only on this issue but others. I think that's been a catch cry for a wee while now. You know, being actively involved. So that's just my contribution at this stage, because I can't recall who that local expert panel was, and having to identify those characteristics from a Te Ao Māori worldview. So just putting that into the mix.
Yeah, Maori Black was on there. I can't remember who else.
There was Maori Black, John Sheen, Forest and Bird Rep, Andrew Curtis, the last one.
Mr. Chairman. You know, we understand you deal with the planning committee, and we
Sorry?
have. No, I'm talking to James. Sorry.
Yep.
And I understand, you know, you guys are working with the planning committee, and you know, there has to be a better way. There's so much happening out there, and I see things in the paper, local paper, and I'm thinking, I don't know anything about that. We are the Māori committee. Why aren't we informed of what's happening? We come to these meetings every second month. Why can't we get some details of what's going on with the planning? Because we come in these huis and we're blind. And you know, I totally agree with what Paul's saying. You know, we come in here blind. And I saw something in the paper the other day of something going on with the council and all that. And I think, when did that happen? I've been to all the meetings this year and last year. I don't remember, you know, being told about this certain thing going on. So, you know, there's certainly a lack of communication. You know, and if my matu over here is upset, well, then we're all upset.
Look, historically, I think what we've tried to do is ensure that the committees don't overlap in their business, and we've kept them separate. But the very purpose of bringing this item today is the initiative we're now taking to try and ensure that the work of the RPC is visible to this committee, and we bring it to you. But in this case, obviously it goes back, there's a long history here, it goes back to 2016. So the Māori Standing Committee hasn't had the visibility of the development of this while it's been worked through the RPC that it could have. So I think what we just need to do going forward is ensure that you get regular reporting on the business of the RPC, and you've got some visibility of what work they're doing without getting down into you having to consider all the papers they consider, and then we have two committees doing each other's work, if you like. But a summary, I think, of the work that they're doing would be helpful.
Mr. Chairman, just on this same point, last Monday, a group of regional council people came out to Porangaho and had a look at something. And let's assume they had a look at the river down from the thing. This is 2 occasions. It would be quite nice to pick up a member of the regional council to go along with you and just give you a bit deeper insight into what you're looking at it. Because what happens when you come back is you start making decisions. Hence today.
You're right.
I would hate to think I've got to find a way to talk to my people about what happens from the bridge down to the mouth of the river. All the kaimona we take out of that river comes from there. And they'll feel like someone is planning something different for the future. And in fact they are. So this may be what the beauty of this partnership is about, so that we don't, or we find another way of actually breaking the news for the so-called betterment of from the bridge to the mouth. A better method than being let know. That's what I hope for out of the future. Thank you.
Kia ora. I just want to know, James, when we go through the kotahi plan and we incorporate all the different areas within Te Matawa Maui and the kotahi plan, will it override or include or extend on the outstanding water bodies, what's included, what's guaranteed in the kotahi plan? so that we still have opportunity in Kotahi Plan for like all these waterways that may feel like they've missed out because of this process we've had to follow. Can that still be addressed in the Kotahi Plan?
Yes, so the Kotahi Plan will create an opportunity to put in place a whole range of measures to protect all the water bodies outside of our outstanding water bodies and provide a level of protection to them. So the short answer is yes. I don't think there would be any point in revisiting the outstanding water bodies themselves once the Environment Court has ruled, because at that point we'll have some case law. What has been a really long and robust process of considering, I think, you say 140 originally water bodies across the region. So we've comprehensively done that exercise, so that legal piece will be done. But Kotahi provides that opportunity to look at all of the land and water interactions and how we can, do much better in terms of protection. So, and that's the main game. That's the big game, really. Yeah.
Is there any further discussion? If there's not, does someone like to move that we receive this report? Anyway, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against?
I wish to abstain.
Sorry?
I wish to abstain.
You abstain?
Yes.
Okay. One abstention. Motion carried. I've just been informed that we're supposed to take a break because of time, but we've got one block there from number 14 to 17. I just want to ask those people that are going to present that, do you think you can put that over within 20 minutes or so? Is it longer discussion than that? Otherwise, in other words, should we have a break or should we just push on and finish the meeting?
Top it out? Yeah.
Are we allowed to?
Well, it's literally just taken it to read.
We had a lovely
Okay.
lunch.
We have.
Yeah.
I'm fine. Yeah.
Sorry? I think we'll box on because we don't need a long dissertation on each point. We just need a summary. So the statutory advocacy update on page 45.
So, Chair, this is really just an informational item about the large body of national work that's going on, as well as regional work. This is a report that also goes to our regional planning committee, and so it's quite a good mechanism for this committee to know what's happening in the planning space. So happy to take any questions, but ask that it be taken as read.
Any questions of the CA? If not, would someone like to move that we receive this report?
I shall.
I'll put the motion on. In favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Number 15, organisational activities.
Who was the mover? Mara and? Oh, you know what?
Yeah.
You know what, Mara?
Or was it me and you moved in second? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
You just pick your victim, Annalie.
Seems like it, yes.
Well,
The activities report.
So, Chair, look, we'll take that as read as well. If I could just draw the committee's attention to the fact that at the time of writing there were 19 active prosecutions before the courts. We're doing a considerably larger amount of prosecutorial work at the moment and just taking a tougher line on a range of things, including obviously outdoor burning, but in other areas too. So I approved 2 prosecutions this week for sediment discharge from subdivisions, so we'll be clamping down on those as well. So we're just continuing to make sure that the community understand that we won't tolerate breaches to the regional rules. So we're getting good results from the court on that, and I can advise the committee that we have taken a prosecution in relation to the large industrial discharge that occurred into the Ahuriri estuary last year. So that will, when we get an outcome from that prosecution, we'll come back and advise the committee of that. Otherwise, we'll take the report as read.
Any questions? Discussion? Someone like to move that we receive this report? Second it? Yep. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Number 16, reports of the committee meetings.
So, Chair, once again, information item to ensure the committee is cited on what else is happening in the other council committees. And obviously this committee maintains good representation through yourself and also Michelle and Mike across the totality of the council's business. So we're continuing to get good representation from them in terms of the views of this committee and the views of Māori generally.
Any discussion? If not, would someone like to move that we accept this report, or receive this report? I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. We're now on to minor items. Api, you were...
First,
Sorry?
Henawai.
Oh, sorry, anyway.
Oh, kia ora, Chair. Kia ora tātou. So my minor item is around the local government New Zealand Te Maruata hui that was held in Marlborough in July. And Te Maruata is the Māori committee of the National Council of Local Government New Zealand. So the role of Te Maruata is to promote increased representation of Māori as elected members on local government. It's also to enhance Māori participation in local government processes, provide support for councils in building strong relationships with iwi hapu Māori groups, and it fosters and supports a network of Māori elected members and staff of local government. So that includes the members such as this committee to be able to join Te Maruata and also to attend the annual meetings, which are just before the local government annual conferences. So last month, myself, Baden, Barbara and Sally Crown were the three that were there from, I would say, Te Matawa Maui, Māori elected councillors. And I suppose it's just an invitation to think for these committee members, if you'd like to be a part of Te Maruata group and maybe attend next year's hui. And it was celebrated at that hui that there will be 23 new councils that will have Māori elected members attend that hui, most likely for next year. After the 22 elections. So, that was discussed, as well as strategising as a rōpū across the country where we'd like to go in terms of Māori elected members, committee members into the future. So it's just a tono to put out there. Look up Te Maruata or come and talk to me a bit more about that hui and that rōpū if you want to join and be a part of it. Kia ora.
Any commentary, any questions?
What's the name of it?
Te Maruata.
Te Maruata. Yeah, Te Maruata.
How effective is it? Where do you fit into the scheme of things?
Yeah, so local government, they have their own national council and they have a seat there for Te Maruata. And so you get to start to dictate from that national advocacy level for elected members in New Zealand what remits you want to be able to drive to negotiate with central government on behalf of local government. Yeah, so that's in a nutshell.
And just through you, Mr. Chairman, I recall some years ago, and and it's probably gone through a name change a couple of times. I found them really, really beneficial, and do they still hold them over a couple of days? Or was it one? It gave an opportunity, I guess, around the sorts of thinking that's going on in other regions, consistent to everything that we all face, and it does provide that kind of talk fest in and around the sort of issues that others may be looking for solutions and vice versa. So I've found those sort of forums are really, really useful. And certainly they made it provision for, as you've just extended an invitation, for any of the committees of councils to come along if they so desire, want to come along, but very beneficial anyway.
And just through the chair, in addition to that, Te Maruata, I understand, also contributed to LGNZ's submission on the exposure draft for natural and built.
Thank you. Any other comment? Would someone like to move or we receive? No, do we have to
No,
receive?
we don't.
No, we don't have to receive this. I don't have to receive that. Thank you for that. Hawke. Yeah.
Remuneration. Okay, for our members. As you know, our members attend a number of huis. During our meetings, these every bi-monthly hui. So there's a lot going on out there amongst our own members, and only once have I been to see James to get some type of remuneration, and I was successful on that occasion. But what is the... I don't want to be going knocking on James's door every time. I want to know what is a better procedure.
Chair, if I could just clarify. So we're particularly talking about those occasions when there's a hui that you're involved in, which is a liaison effectively between this committee and your constituents, if you like. And can I take that offline and talk to Pete and perhaps come back with some thoughts on a framework that might provide a consistent way of dealing with that?
Shouldn't that be, every year there's a remuneration review of sorts, so should it be part of that?
Probably is timely that we build it into a review. Of course, with the Maori committee, we're still on a meeting fee basis, but with the Ipcc tangata whenua reps, we're on a standing salary, and that was so that activities outside of the committee would be remunerated, if you like. The whole job was remunerated as opposed to a meeting fee. So we haven't addressed that yet for this committee. So take that offline.
I think we can look forward to some contract negotiations. I'll bring myself as a bargaining agent.
Okay, Mike, are you there?
Yep,
Kia ora, mate. It's your...
thank you. So while you're a bargaining agent there, Rick, this might become useful. This is in regards to, I think it's building on the bigger picture of what's been said today in regards to the amount of work that's out there, confronting mana whenua, and not only regional councils, but councils in general. So there's a lot of work to be done. In individual entities, we all have a limited budget, a limited resource that we can throw at these issues. When we look at across the board at our councils, from running from the central through to the Wairau, and each of our councils are in a different position, running from having one to perhaps 3 or 4 Maori relationship staff that they can turn to the issues pertaining to mana whenua. Then when we look to mana whenua themselves, we as tai whenua, PSGs, as iwi, we also have minimal resources that we can put to these issues, ranging from one full-time to 2 or 3 at best. So we're always behind the 8 ball, whether we're a council or whether we're mana whenua. But when you look across it and you take a collaborative view across the region, there is significant resource as a region we're actually putting into this. It's just a matter of how can we do this in a far more collaborative fashion, where we are, as a region, gaining the benefit out of the resources we do have. And for me, I think that's having gone through the long-term planning, the budgets that had to go through not only for Hawke's Bay Regional Council, but for Hastings City Council. If you like, I've got a far deeper appreciation of what councils have to go through and put up with, and trying to make their dollars spread. So I know that there's limitations in regards to those resources. And it's also the same for our mana whenua. So I suppose what I'm saying here is, when I look to regional council where we have our Maori relationship tari office, it has its resource of roughly four full-time staff members, possibly going to see it rise to five, possibly even get up to 6. But that's really stretching its actual resource. But it's still having to deal with mana whenua entities that are really, really struggling just to put up a full-time person. The luckier ones may have 2. So there's always going to be this tension in regards to resourcing. So it's about how can we work smarter with the resources that we do have as a region to get the best outcome for the region and the wider community in dealing with the environmental issues that confront us all. And I go back to Rick's earlier comments in regards to the climate change and the huge issues we're going to face there. If we don't start to work collaboratively, we're going to struggle. And this is going to take leadership from all parties. And that, if you like, it's sharing the resource, it's sharing our knowledge, and it's actually accepting the outcomes as being an outcome that's best for the region, rather than an individual entity. So yeah, I think that's what I wanted to just bring to the table. It's not looking for answers today, but I think it's something in a direction we need to have a conversation around. Kia ora.
Good point.
Yes, that just goes into the report, the meeting report. Mike's the topic of that, is that right?
Yeah.
Any discussion on Mike's? No? Ko take tō ki te whakakawhi. Hoa tu kia koe e te matua. Hame.
Discussion? Yes, please.
Oh. Was it Tata? Right?
Was there some?
Oh. Ina koe kuru? Ai.
Me no ki tātou. Rere te maanga me ngāne hera pona te Untitled Chapter. Whakungi mai tēne mātou ki roto ki te arohanua. Nā ki te mai nei hoki tātou rungi ngā huarai ki hoki pai e katoa ki tātou ki wata te kai am hā. Nā ki te mai ngā whānau ki te noho pauri ana, ngā mea kei roho hoi pera e noho māwiwi ana. Ki piki te ora, piki te kawa me te mana matangi nungi tēnā me tēnā o rātou. Rere te maanga me ngāne hera pona te toka tū te tapu. Whakungi mai nei mātou ki roto ki te arohanua. Pai here tia tēne mātou. Kei roto ki te rangi Māori ngā wā katoa. Koe anō ki te maanga hei te ko mai. Ai nei, aka nei ai.
Ai.
Tūturu paka maua ki a tīna.
Tīna.
Yehu ye.
Tai
Kia ora.
Thank you.
Kia ora tātou.